In lesson 2.4, we're going to write linear equations, extend on what we did in 2.3 where we just graphed them. We're also going to deal with parallel and perpendicular and writing equations of those. So we'll be reviewing what's true about parallel and perpendicular lines and slopes from lesson 2.3 as well. So first thing we're going to do is look at slope-intercept form, or remind you what slope-intercept form is, which is y equals mx plus b. And we're also going to look at what we call point-slope form. For some of you that may be new, others may have been exposed to it, and sometimes that's a little bit easier. But you can actually use either of these when you're writing your equation. I'm going to show both methods for some problems, and then I'm going to pick a method for some of the problems that we do. You can decide what you like better, what's easier for you to understand. Okay, so the first problem we're going to do, write an equation given a slope and a point. Write an equation in slope-intercept form for the line that has a slope of negative 3/5 and passes through 5, negative 2. Even if we use point-slope form, at the end we're going to convert that into slope-intercept form. So I'll show you two different methods. Like I said, you can pick the method you think you like better. If you're going to use slope-intercept form, we'll do that first. Y equals mx plus b. So my slope is negative 3/5, and it goes through the point 5 and negative 2. If you use y equals mx plus b, you plug in your slope, which is negative 3/5. You plug in your x value, okay, which is 5, your y value, which is negative 2. So your x value is 5, and then I have plus b on here, and your y value is negative 2. So you form an equation by putting in a value for m, x, and y, an equation that's got b in it. Now you go ahead and solve. These two right here, there's multiplication in between, so we're going to multiply negative 3/5 times 5. If you do that, it's like 5 over 1, the 5's cancel, so that would be negative 3. And we have plus b. Solving that, we want to get the b alone. We're going to add 3. We're going to add 3. So b is equal to, that should be positive 1. So my equation then, in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. At the end, y and x are back in your equation, and you put in your slope, which is negative 3/5. That goes in front of x, and then my b, which is plus 1. If I use point-slope form, and this is my slope, negative 3/5, and this is my point, 5, negative 2, this is really your x1 and y1 in point-slope form. So you leave y in there, you go y minus a negative 2, because y1 is negative 2, equals the slope, negative 3/5, times x minus the x value, which in this case is right here, 5. Now this turns into a plus, so we have y plus 2 equals, you distribute on, excuse me, the right side, so I get negative 3/5 x, and then negative times negative will be plus 3/5 times 5, the 5's cancel, and leaves you with 3. And now notice, to get it in slope-intercept form, all you want to do is solve for y, or get the y alone, and we get y equals negative 3/5 x, and then plus 1 when I combine these two. So we get the same thing. You can use either method. Let's go through the next one. Here we have the slope, negative 3/2, the point, negative 4, 1. So if we're using slope-intercept form, we're going to plug negative 3/2 in for m. In for y, we're going to put 1, because this is my x and this is my y. In for x, I'm going to put negative 4 plus b. So I multiply here. Negative times negative will be positive. I would get 12 over 2, but that reduces to 6, so it's 6 plus b. Now I subtract 6, so b is negative 5, which means my equation is y equals the slope, negative 3/2 x, and then my y-intercept is negative 5. So there would be, using slope-intercept form, doing it. Let's go through and do it with point-slope. So I'm going to do y minus my y value from my point, which is 1, equals the slope, negative 3/2 times x, minus the x value, which is a negative 4. So that turns into a plus So it's y minus 1 equals, you're going to distribute, so it's negative 3 halves x, and then 3 halves times 4, it's going to be positive there because that's a, that's going to be a minus because we're distributing negative 3 halves. So it's negative 3 halves x, it's going to be negative, but 4 over 1, you either have 12 over 2, which reduces to 6, or you could cancel first, 6 over 1, so it's just 6. So minus 6, and then we're going to add 1. We're going to add 1 to get y alone. So it's negative 3 halves x minus 5. Get the same thing. And again, you don't have to do both methods. I'm just showing you both. You pick what's easier for you. If you're given 2 points, we have to use the slope formula, which is right here. And we've done that in the last couple lessons. So the first thing you need to do is find the slope from your given points. So we're going to do y2 minus y1, so 7 minus a negative 3, all over negative 3 minus 2. This turns into a plus, so we get 10 over negative 5, or in this case we get negative 2. Again, if it comes out to be a fraction, leave it as a fraction. I'll do y equals mx plus b on this one. If you want to in your notes, do it in point slope. You can go ahead and try that, but I'm not going to do both methods for every one. So y equals mx plus b. I would then take one of these points. It doesn't matter which one you pick, so I'm going to pick this. Here's my x and here's my y. So in for the y, I'm going to put negative 3. In for the slope, we got the slope to be negative 2 with the slope formula. And then in for x, I'm going to put 2. And then I have plus b. Substituting. Sorry about that. Substituting this right here into y equals mx plus b. So we go ahead and we multiply. This would be negative 4 plus b is equal to negative 3. We're going to add 4. So b is equal to 1. So at the end, I go back to y equals mx plus b. I put my slope in. I put my y-intercept in. So it's y equals negative 2x plus 1. And I'm not going to do point slope for this one, but if you want to do that, you certainly can. Okay, we have a world problem here. Sales, as a part-time salesperson, Jean Stock is paid a daily salary plus commission. When her sales are 100, she makes 58. When her sales are 300, she makes 78. So, sales is the independent variable, or what we call the control variable. This is like they're giving you a point here. When the sales, we'll call the sales the x value, 100. The y value is 58. Over here, 300, 78. So it's like they're giving you 2 coordinates, they're just written out in words. So we're going to write a linear equation. We have to find the slope first. So we're going to do y2 minus y1. So I'm going to do 78, subtract the y value off of this, which is 58. On the bottom, I'm going to do my x value of 300. I'm going to subtract the x value of 100. So it's 20 over 200, which is 1/10. If it's a real world problem, and you can, if you want to, you can write that as a decimal. So that's 0.1. So now we go into y equals mx plus b, or point slope. And I'm actually going to come down here. We got to write the equation. So let's come up here above the graph. I'm going to go y equals mx plus b. My slope is 0.1. I pick an x and a y value. So I'm going to pick from this point right here. My y value is 58. My x value is 100. So I do 58, and I don't want to run into my grid, so I'm coming up here. So 58 equals 0.1 times 100 is 10, plus b, subtract your 10, so b is 48. So b is 48, which means my equation is y equals 0.1x plus 48. My y-intercept is 48. So the y-intercept represents the daily salary. So the y-intercept is 48, which is the daily salary. Or it represents the 48 is the daily salary. Okay, with no sales. And 0.1 represents a 10% commission, because 0.1, moving it over 2 places, is equivalent to 10%. How much would Jean make in a day if her sales were 500? Notice sales is the x. We want to figure out y, which is the dependent variable. So here's your equation, y equals 0.1x plus 48. So all we have to do here is we want to figure out when the sales are 500, that means we're going to put 500 in for x. So it's 0.1 times 500 plus 48. And 0.1 times 500 is 50. 50 plus 48 would be $98. So if her sales are 500, she would make $98. And I'm not going to use the graph at all. We are usually really using equations to figure that out. Parallel perpendicular lines, reviewing that. Parallel lines have equal slopes. Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. From reviewing that from lesson 2-3. I think both my examples here are perpendicular, but parallel, you're going to use the same slope. So write an equation of a line that passes through 3, -2, perpendicular to this one. Now if you notice, this is in slope-intercept form. So we know the slope from it. If it's not in slope-intercept form, you need to solve it for y, like we did in the last lesson. But here the slope is -5. Now we want perpendicular. So we need to use opposite reciprocal slope to -5. The opposite reciprocal, this is like -5/1, so it'd be positive 1/5. So for perpendicular, I want to use a slope of 1/5. I'm going to use point slope on this, so I know I have to use a 1/5 slope because it's perpendicular, and I'm using the point 3, -2. So we have the slope and we have a point. We're going to use, I'm choosing to use point slope on this one. So this is your x1 and y1. So it's y minus the y value, which is a -2, equals the slope, which is 1/5, times x minus the x value of 3. This becomes a plus, so it's y plus 2 equals, remember in point slope you want to distribute an x, so it's 1/5 x minus 1/5 times 3 is 3/5, and I'm going to write it as a fraction, and I would suggest leaving it as a fraction. And then our next step is to subtract 2. So y equals 1/5 x. So I'm doing -3/5 minus 2/1. I'll show you finding common denominator. Obviously, if you have a calculator, you can do this, but it would be multiply by 5 to get your common denominator. So it would be -3/5 minus 10/5. And -3 minus 10 would be -13/5. A fractional calculator would tell you that. But again, just finding a common denominator, which would be 5, multiply top and bottom there by 5. So -13/5 is what we get when we combine these. There's your equation. Last problem. This one I'm going to use mx plus b form. Passes through this point. Perpendicular again. If it's parallel, use the same slope. So we want perpendicular. So the slope here is -4. I want perpendicular. So I'm going to use, again, the opposite reciprocal of -4/1 is 1/4. So I'm going to use y equals mx plus b on this one. You use what you want to use or whatever is easier for you to use. So and we have this point, -4, 3. So if we're using slope-intercept form, or y equals mx plus b, we put 3 in for y, we put 1/4 in for the slope. In for x, I put -4, and then I have plus b. I'm going to go ahead and multiply these two. So that would be negative, the 4's cancel, so it's actually -1 plus b. We're going to add 1, so b is equal to 4. So, putting this all together in y equals mx plus b to write your final equation, my slope has to go in there, my y-intercept of 4 has to go in, so it would be y equals 1/4 x plus 4.